Manual labor by itself is fucking toxic. Even if you're getting paid handsomely, even if your boss is nice and your coworkers are too, matters not. Manual labor is toxic. The fact that you have to pay to be alive is toxic. Being sedentary, like a chicken in a battery cage, being a pencil pusher in a fucking cubicle all day for some corporation that corresponds to a cause that you don't even fucking agree with, you're just there because you have no other choice, is toxic. And yes, if you have rotten assholes for coworkers and a slave driver for a boss, that just makes matters 10 times worse. But even best case scenario, I am of the mind that going to work is toxic. Even if you love what you do. The fact that you're there for the sake of survival needs is toxic. The toxicity cannot be separated from workmanship.
This other guy, NON-CONFORMIST-RADIO, who I've recently watched a few more of his videos, they see that things are wrong with the world, and we can agree on their observations, but their conclusions are awful. The way they look at the problem just makes things worse. So in this recent video of NON-CONFORMIST-RADIO, he titled it, "Going to Work is Anti-Human." We all know that not all work is anti-human or terrible or soul-crushing, but he was saying that that's kind of how it is for all manual labor, the vast majority of the economy, for people who aren't middle class, upper middle class, or above that. Otherwise, you're stuck with the reality of you're slogging away at McDonald's, or you're working in a factory, you're doing manual labor. It's meaningless, and it's tiring, and it's awful, and it just sucks. And it's like that, and you have to do it because if you don't do that, then you can't pay your rent, and you're out on the street, and you have to eat, and you need shelter, so you're stuck working. And that's why he says that it's toxic. It's a toxic environment to work. And I just think that he's blowing things out of proportion here, because yes, that can happen. Partly, as I'll try to explain, part of it relates to the person and what they choose to see in life. Part of it does relate to actual darkness in the world, but I don't think it's fair to paint such a large swath of the economy as this soul-searching, meaningless thing. Again, it really depends on how you approach the situation, what your attitude is. Because I worked in a meat factory for a year and a half, that could have been a soul-crushing job. It ended up being a positive experience. There's a lot of drudgery, it's cold in there, fairly tiring, but there was camaraderie. I made some friends whom I'm still in touch with, so I didn't have the chance to really do butchery. It would have offered some skills, and either way, you can get bored and say, oh, I'm just a cog in the machine, this is also meaningless, or you can get fascinated in the process. It's an interesting thing how factories work and how the industrial economy functions, and then you can think, maybe I can fit into this process in a different way. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll be promoted, but having the right attitude is going to open up some opportunities for you eventually, because you'll find something that's interesting to you eventually, or you'll move on.
To the degree that you have the free time to do as you please is the degree that your life is based in freedom. But most people do not have freedom of movement insofar as the bodily autonomy of being where they want to be when they want to be there is concerned. Quite the contrary. We start up our car at 6 o'clock in the morning, not because we want to, but because we have to. And sometimes, when we're at work, we have this emotion that overcomes us. where we sense the emotion of meaninglessness. So this sensation is an emotion, and it's called meaninglessness. And as we're engaging in our task, we say to ourselves, I don't want to be doing this task, but I'm doing it anyway, because I have to. This is not freedom, and therefore it is not a life worth living. Therefore, I assert that going to work is unnatural. It's anti-human.
He makes the point in the video that getting up at 6 in the morning is terrible. I mean, it could be, but if you go to bed at like 10:30 or 11, then getting up at the right time of the year, you're rising with the sun coming up. I take my bike up. It's not bad. I mean, it can be bad, sure, in the winter. No one likes getting up at 6 a.m. naturally, but not liking it doesn't mean that it's not good for you. That's the thing. So consider that even unpleasant things could be good for your soul long term. Learning self-discipline, all these things through work.
What's an even more sad sight to see is every time you go into a gas station, especially if it's after 5 p.m. when people are getting off of work, and you see that the majority of people that are standing in line have a 6-pack or a 12-pack in their hands. And you can see the exhaustion and the misery in their eyes, and knowing that they're just going to take that 6-pack or 12-pack, and that's going to be the highlight of their fucking day.
Everyone likes to let loose at the end of the day. That doesn't mean that the job is killing them spiritually. We don't know for all people if that's the case. Maybe for some people, sure. But why take such a negative attitude? You could also take the attitude, they're relieved that the day is done and I'm glad I got work done today. That's what my grandpa has always said. You work and then at the end of the day you'll feel satisfied. And even if it was a bad day, then you endured that and you survived it. And that's an accomplishment. And you can take heart in that. And that means that you got a bit stronger and a bit tougher. Maybe if you let it get to you, then maybe that can weaken you. But it's an opportunity to grow. A lot of this is just dealing socially with other people in my job. But I think in factories in general, there has to be cooperation a lot of the time. Offices, they're going to involve cooperation. Real jobs involve cooperation. I know people don't have social skills these days. That's because they're all on computers. So that aspect of the economy is more antisocial. But you have to have these social skills, and that can be stressful. Sometimes people don't like you. You have to communicate with people. That's the job. That's the endurance. It's not meaningless. It's meaningful for me as a Christian. So in my worldview, it's not a problem to endure suffering. In fact, it's openly welcomed to take up your cross. It's actually a virtue. So I'm making this point to say that none of the suffering is meaningless unless you let it be meaningless, unless you only focus on the negatives and amplify the negatives, and then you will start to see negatives everywhere you go. And a job where there's drudgery will just become ever more drudgerous to you. It's important to start the day positive, especially Monday morning. Come into work wanting to be there. Find a way to be interested in it. Find a way to think about it as an opportunity to do something this day, to apply yourself. Because otherwise, if you know yourself well, you'd be wasting time at home. I'd be wasting time at home. On the internet, watching stuff I don't need to be watching, wasting time.
Manual labor by itself is fucking toxic.
You know, manual labor was denigrated in his video as the worst thing. Is it really the worst sphere of work? It's not necessarily worse than being in a school or being in a corporate office environment. Certainly it's getting less of the woke pressure in a manual environment, just for practical reasons. A lot of people are immigrants and they don't even understand what the woke thing is. Try that with Jamaicans. So it's more straightforward. You're around men who still have masculinity to some extent. And that's good. That's a better environment for a man to be in these days. So maybe manual labor that's not the worst thing to happen to you.
If I was to flaunt my red bush on fans only fans, I wonder if I would make more money than I'm making right now by the hour. I bet I would.
So I wanted to read this comment some lady left underneath his video, and this person says, "I have to thank you for this video because it made me so grateful that I am an exotic dancer. I have no schedule, I'm my own boss, I'm allowed to work as much as I want, and can even choose what time to come into work. It has allowed me to live comfortably and work part-time. I now have a newfound gratitude for it because the alternative, if I couldn't do this, sucks." Non-Conformist Radio likes this comment. He gave it a heart. This is very problematic. I'm not glad that she's doing this, but the comment is helpful because it doesn't take long for this worldview to have a negative impact on your life by objective standards of what is moral, what is good for your soul. She thinks that the regular economy is meaningless and very stressful, but you're going to expose yourself to men? You're going to feed into men's lust? That's not good for society, and it's not good for you. And to be fair, women shouldn't have to be in the workforce. Like, this lady shouldn't have to be in that position. She should be taken care of by a husband. But unfortunately, we don't live in that economy anymore. But the fact is, people just want to avoid pain and seek pleasure, and they don't understand the damage that could do to your soul. Hasta luego, amigos.